In the year 1204, the unthinkable happened. The Crusaders, warriors sworn to defend Christendom, stormed the walls of Constantinople, the greatest Christian city on earth. For 9 centuries, Constantinople had withstood all comers: Persians, Arabs, barbarians from the steppes. But on April 12th, it fell not to infidels, but to brothers in faith. Gold, fire, and blood replaced the dream of Jerusalem. Churches were looted. Icons were smashed. Nuns were violated. The soldiers of the cross tore down the walls of the city of Constantine, not in the name of Christ, but for gold, vengeance, and betrayal. This is not the story of a holy war. This is the story of how a crusade turned its sword against its own. It begins with hope. In 1198, Pope Innocent III called for a new crusade to retake Jerusalem. The Holy Land had been lost. Saladin had triumphed. The Third Crusade, despite the heroics of Richard the Lionheart, had failed to recapture the Holy City. Now, a new generation would try. This would be the Fourth Crusade. And unlike the previous campaigns led by kings and emperors, this one would be led by ambitious nobles seeking glory and redemption. From France came Count Louis of Blois, from Flanders came Baldwin Ix, a young count hungry for honor. And from Italy came Boniface of Montferrat, a seasoned warrior chosen to lead the expedition. They were not kings, but they dreamed like kings. They would sail to Egypt, crush the Ayyubid Sultanate, and then march triumphant into Jerusalem. The plan was bold, ambitious, and strategically sound. Egypt was the key to Muslim power in the region. Take Egypt, and Jerusalem would fall. But there was one problem. They needed ships. In 1201, the Crusader leaders traveled to Venice to negotiate passage. Venice was the greatest maritime power in the Mediterranean, wealthy, cunning, and ruled by one of history's most formidable statesmen. His name was Enrico Dandolo. Dandolo was in his 90s. He was blind, or nearly so. But his vision for Venice's future was sharper than any man's. When the Crusaders came asking for transport, he saw opportunity. He offered to build a massive fleet, enough to carry 33,500 men, 4,500 horses, and supplies for a year. The price, 85,000 silver marks, an astronomical sum. The Crusaders agreed. They had no choice. Without Venice, there would be no crusade. They believed thousands would answer the call. They believed the money could be raised. They believed God would provide. They were wrong. By the summer of 1202, the Crusaders gathered in Venice. But instead of the promised 33,500 men, only about 12,000 arrived. Many had sailed from other ports. Others had simply stayed home. The fleet sat ready, magnificent, expensive, and far too large for the army that appeared. The Venetians demanded payment. The Crusaders could not pay. They had raised only 51,000 marks. They were short by 34,000, a debt they could never repay, and so the trap closed. Enrico Dandolo made a proposal. The Crusaders could work off their debt. Venice had a problem. The city of Zara, modern-day Zadar, on the Dalmatian coast had rebelled and placed itself under the protection of the King of Hungary. If the Crusaders would help Venice recapture Zara, the debt could be postponed. There was one complication. Zara was a Christian city. The King of Hungary had taken the cross himself. To attack Zara would be to attack fellow Christians. Pope Innocent III sent urgent letters forbidding the attack. He threatened excommunication. Several crusaders, including Simon de Montfort and Ingerin de Boves, refused to participate and left the expedition. But the majority stayed. They were trapped in Venice, in debt, with no way forward except through sin. In November 1202, the fleet sailed for Zara. The siege was brief. The city surrendered after 2 weeks. The Crusaders hung crosses from their siege engines, hoping to signal their Christian identity. The defenders hung crosses from their walls, begging for mercy. It did not matter, Zara fell. Churches were looted, homes were burned. And the Fourth Crusade, launched to liberate Jerusalem, had instead destroyed a Christian city. Pope Innocent III excommunicated the entire Crusader army. The holy mission was now corrupted. But they were too far gone to turn back. As the Crusaders wintered in Zara, a new opportunity arrived. His name was Alexios Angelos, and he came bearing promises. Alexios was the son of the deposed Byzantine Emperor Isaac II Angelos. In 1195, Isaac had been overthrown and blinded by his own brother, Alexios III, who seized the throne. Young Alexios escaped and spent years wandering Europe, seeking help to restore his father. Now he stood before the Crusaders with an offer. If they would sail to Constantinople and restore his father to the throne, he would pay them 200,000 silver marks, enough to cover their debt and fund the expedition to Egypt. He would provide 10,000 troops for the crusade. He would even submit the Eastern Orthodox Church to papal authority, healing the schism that had divided Christianity since 1054. To men drowning in debt and doubt, it sounded like salvation. The blind Doge Dandolo saw something else: the chance to dominate Byzantine trade routes. Venice had long competed with Constantinople for control of Mediterranean commerce. This was an opportunity to tip the balance forever. In the spring of 1203, the fleet turned east. The Crusade for Jerusalem now marched toward the greatest Christian city in the world. On June 23, 1203, the Crusader fleet arrived at Constantinople. The knights stood on the decks of their ships and stared in awe. Constantinople was unlike anything they had ever seen. It had a population of 500,000, larger than any city in Western Europe. Its walls were the most formidable fortifications on earth, triple-layered, studded with towers, stretching for miles. The Hagia Sophia's golden dome shimmered in the sun. The palaces, the churches, the libraries, this was the city of the world's desire. But mixed with awe was envy. These Western knights came from wooden castles and muddy towns. Constantinople was marble and gold. For 1,000 years, while the West had suffered through the Dark Ages, Byzantium had preserved the glory of Rome. The Byzantines watched the fleet with distrust. They had seen crusaders before. The First Crusade had passed through in 1096, and relations had been tense ever since. The Byzantines viewed the Latins as barbaric, uncultured, and dangerous. The Latins viewed the Byzantines as effete, treacherous, and heretical. Now, a Latin army sat outside their gates, demanding they accept a puppet emperor. Emperor Alexios III refused. The Crusaders attacked. They landed their forces and assaulted the Tower of Galata, which controlled the chain stretched across the Golden Horn. The chain prevented enemy ships from entering the harbor. After fierce fighting, the Crusaders took the tower and lowered the chain. The Venetian fleet sailed into the Golden Horn and attacked the city from the sea. The Venetians brought their ships close to the walls and raised siege ladders directly from the decks. Blind old Dandolo stood at the prow of his galley, the banner of St. Mark in his hand, directing the assault on July 17, 1203. Emperor Alexios III panicked and fled the city, taking the imperial treasury with him. The Byzantines released the blind Isaac II from prison and restored him to the throne. Young Alexios was crowned co-emperor as Alexios IV. The Crusaders celebrated. They had won without bloodshed. Soon they would have their money, and the crusade could continue to Egypt. But Alexios IV quickly discovered he could not keep his promises. The treasury was empty. His uncle had taken it. The Byzantine people hated him for bringing Latin armies to their gates. When Alexios tried to raise the money through heavy taxation, riots broke out. When he tried to submit the Orthodox Church to Rome, the people called him a traitor. The Crusaders waited outside the walls, growing hungrier and angrier. Months passed. Alexios made excuses and partial payments. Tensions mounted. In January 1204, the Byzantine nobility had had enough. A young nobleman named Alexios Doukas Mortsouphlis led a palace coup. He strangled Alexios IV with a bowstring. Isaac II died shortly after, possibly murdered, possibly from shock. Mortsouphlis crowned himself Emperor Alexios V. His first act was to refuse all payments to the Crusaders. His second was to order them to leave. The Crusaders were trapped. They were deep in debt. They had no money. They had no provisions. Winter was ending, but they were no closer to Egypt or Jerusalem than when they started, and so they made a decision that would echo through history. In March 1204, the Crusader leaders and Venetian Doge signed a treaty. They would conquer Constantinople, divide its territories among themselves, and crown a Latin emperor. The loot would be pooled and distributed, 3/8 to the Crusaders, 3/8 to Venice, and 1/4 to whoever became emperor. What began as a crusade for Jerusalem now became a war of conquest against fellow Christians. On April 9, 1204, the assault began. The Crusaders attacked the sea walls along the Golden Horn. The Venetians brought their ships close and extended flying bridges from the masts to the walls. For 3 days, the Byzantines held firm. The defenders fought with desperate courage. They threw Greek fire, the terrifying incendiary weapon that burned even on water. They hurled stones and shot arrows. They repelled every assault, but on April 12th, the walls were breached. A group of crusaders forced open a small gate. Others scaled the walls from Venetian ships. The Venetians started fires to create a smokescreen, but the flames spread out of control, consuming entire neighborhoods. Emperor Alexios V fled. The Byzantine army collapsed. And Constantinople, the city that had withstood 9 centuries of sieges, fell. For 3 days, the Crusaders sacked the city. It was not a battle. It was butchery. The Crusaders poured through the streets, drunk on victory and greed. They smashed down the doors of palaces and churches. They melted down ancient icons for the gold. They stripped mosaics from the walls of Hagia Sophia and stabled their horses in the nave. Libraries were burned. Priceless manuscripts, Greek and Roman texts that had survived a millennium, went up in flames. Statues from antiquity were broken apart and melted down. The bronze horses of the Hippodrome were torn from their pedestals and shipped to Venice, where they still stand today above St. Mark's Basilica. Women were raped. Nuns were dragged from convents. Old men were killed for sport. The streets ran with blood. Chroniclers wrote that the looting was beyond description. A contemporary account states, "Since the creation of the world, such spoils had never been taken from one city." The wealth of Constantinople, accumulated over centuries, was torn apart in 3 days of madness. For 3 days, Constantinople burned. The city of Constantine became a grave of faith. On May 16, 1204, Baldwin of Flanders was crowned emperor of the Latin Empire in Hagia Sophia. He received about 1/4 of the former Byzantine territories. Venice took key ports and islands, securing its commercial dominance. The remaining territories were divided among the Crusader barons. The cross had conquered the cross. The sack of Constantinople was not just a military catastrophe. It was a spiritual wound that would never heal. The Orthodox world was horrified. Reports of Crusader brutality spread across the Eastern Christian lands. For centuries, the Orthodox Church had resisted submission to Rome, citing theological and cultural differences. Now, those differences seemed justified. Rome had sent soldiers to loot and murder. The East-West Schism of 1054, which had divided Christianity into Catholic and Orthodox branches, was now deepened beyond repair. Rome and Constantinople would never truly reconcile. The Fourth Crusade solidified the divide. The sack also destroyed Byzantium's ability to defend itself. Byzantine aristocrats fled Constantinople and established several successor states: the Empire of Nicaea, the Empire of Trebizond, and the Despotate of Epirus. These states fought among themselves and against the Latin invaders for decades. In 1261, Michael VIII Palaiologos, ruler of Nicaea, recaptured Constantinople and restored the Byzantine Empire. But the restored empire was a shadow of its former self. It had lost most of its territories, its wealth, its population, and its military strength. The Byzantine Empire would survive for another 192 years. But it never recovered. It was poor, weak, and divided. And when the Ottoman Turks came knocking at the gates in the 15th century, there was no strength left to resist. On May 29, 1453, Constantinople fell for the final time, this time to Sultan Mehmed II. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome, guardian of Christian civilization for over 1,000 years, ceased to exist. Historians trace the ultimate fall of Byzantium directly to 1204. The Fourth Crusade did not merely weaken the Byzantine Empire, it gutted it. It left Christendom in the East vulnerable, divided, and ultimately doomed. The sword that once defended Christendom had cut its heart instead. History remembers victories, but it is tragedies that teach us most. The Fourth Crusade began with prayer and ended with plunder. It was called to save Jerusalem, but never came close. Instead, it destroyed the greatest Christian city on earth. It was not lost to enemies of the faith. It was betrayed by those who claimed to defend it. Pope Innocent III, when he learned of the sack, was devastated. He wrote, "How can we expect the Greeks to return to ecclesiastical union when all they see is an example of perdition and darkness?" The Fourth Crusade stands as one of history's greatest betrayals. A holy mission corrupted by debt, greed, political ambition, and the brutal logic of violence. What began as a movement to liberate Jerusalem became an exercise in conquest and cruelty. In the ashes of Constantinople, one lesson remained, that when greed and pride guide the holy cause, the holiest dreams burn the brightest before turning to dust. The Crusaders sailed home with their loot. Venice displayed its stolen bronze horses. Baldwin ruled for less than a year before being killed in battle with the Bulgarians. The Latin Empire collapsed within decades, but the damage was done. Christianity was divided. Byzantium was broken. And the road to 1453, when the Ottomans would finally extinguish the light of Constantinople, was paved in 1204. They marched to free Jerusalem. They ended up destroying the greatest Christian city on earth. In 1204, the soldiers of the cross tore down the walls of Constantinople, not in the name of Christ, but for gold, vengeance, and betrayal. This is the story history tried to hide, the crusade that turned on itself, the holy war that became a crime, the moment when faith was sacrificed on the altar of ambition. Now you know.